"She's not training anybody," First Sergeant Corrigan said, loud enough for the whole platoon to hear. "She's going to babysit the rejects until they quit, or wash out trying. That's the job. Don't dress it up." I was standing in the third rank of Echo's overflow platoon when he said it. 26 of us. Every one a recycle, a medical hold, or a discipline case the company didn't want anymore. I'd failed land navigation twice, and put my fist through a wall locker once, and I knew exactly which category I fell into. We laughed, not because it was funny, because laughing at her was easier than thinking about what we were. Staff Sergeant Dana Holloway didn't laugh. She didn't flinch either. She just took the roster out of Corrigan's hand, folded it once along a crease that was already there, and said, "Copy. Echo recycle. Fall in." She was maybe 5'6", hair pulled back so tight it looked painted on, and she wore her camis like they belonged to her, which not everybody can pull off. Nobody in that platoon thought she belonged to anything. We'd heard she'd been pulled from a training company across post, for reasons nobody would say out loud, and the only thing Corrigan ever told us about her record was that there wasn't much of one to speak of. A few schools, no deployments listed, 11 years in, and a staff sergeant's stripes that should have belonged to someone with more to show for it. "Glorified hall monitor," somebody behind me muttered. I didn't correct him. The first week, a recruit named Padilla decided to test her. He stepped half out of formation, looked her dead in the eye, and asked if she'd ever actually fired the rifle she was carrying, or just qualified on the paperwork. She didn't bother getting loud about it. She told him to start the stopwatch, took her own rifle off her shoulder, and ran the weapons assembly drill, blindfolded in front of the whole platoon, stripped, function checked, reassembled, in under 40 seconds, faster than the time standard posted on our own armory wall. She slung the rifle back over her shoulder and told him to get in line before he found her a harder question to answer. Nobody tested her with their hands after that. The mouths kept going. At evening chow a week later, a platoon sergeant from the company next door, Staff Sergeant Drum, square-built, popular with the cadre, the kind of NCO who got listened to in any room he walked into, leaned over our table and asked her, not quietly, if the company was running low on real instructors, or if they'd just started handing stripes to whoever needed a desk job that didn't require thinking. A few of his recruits laughed along behind him, the way we'd laughed in formation that first day. Holloway looked up from her tray, said, "Pass the salt, Drum," and went back to eating. He didn't get an answer, and somehow that was worse for him than if she'd given him one. She ran us hard for 6 weeks after that, and never raised her voice once. She knew every name in that platoon inside of 3 days. Not just first and last, but hometown, the reason each of us had landed in her recycle bin, whether it was a bad ankle, or a bad attitude, or, in my case, both. That should have told me something. It didn't, not yet. The week before our field evaluation, she had us walk the entire training area on foot, every wash, every ridge, every culvert, with a topo map and a compass, in the kind of heat that makes your eyes water. Half the platoon thought it was punishment. I remember her stopping at a dry wash called Caro Cut, deep enough to swallow a deuce and a half, and marking 3 points on the high ground above it with strips of orange engineer tape, quiet, methodical, pacing off the distance from the wash floor to each mark, and writing the numbers down in a green notebook she kept in her cargo pocket. She checked the long-range forecast that night too, I found out later, on a laptop in the company office nobody else bothered to look at. Nobody asked her why she was doing any of it. We just wanted water and shade, and the walk to be over. 3 days later we bivouacked in that same wash for our final field problem, because that's where the exercise plan put us. And the exercise plan didn't care what she'd marked on a map 3 days earlier with nobody watching, and it didn't care that Drum's platoon bivouacked on the next finger of the same wash, with their own cadre running their own schedule, hadn't walked it at all. It started raining a little after midnight, the kind of rain that doesn't seem like much until you notice the sound of the wash has changed under it, gone from a trickle to something with weight behind it. I was on watch when Holloway came out of her position already moving. No flashlight, counting heads in the dark by name instead of number, which I had never once seen anyone do in 6 weeks of training. Tarrant, Mendez, look at the water. I looked. It had come up over the gravel bar in the time it took her to say my name. Up now. High ground, the marked points. Go, she said, and there was nothing in her voice but the words themselves. No panic riding under them, which is the only reason 26 half-asleep recruits moved as fast and as cleanly as we did in the dark. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. She'd already given us the route 3 days ago and called it a punishment walk. She got 11 of us moving toward the nearest tape mark while she went down the line waking the rest, and that's when we heard Drum's platoon screaming from the next finger of the wash, 200 meters downstream, where their cadre hadn't marked anything because nobody had told them to bother. The water down there was already chest-deep on the low ground and climbing. Holloway didn't ask whose problem that was. She handed me her pack, 80 pounds, just like that, into my arms, said, "Get them to the points, you know the way now," and went down into the wash by herself with a coil of static line over one shoulder, into water that was already taking grown men sideways off their feet. I got the 11 up to the marked ground. I won't pretend that took anything but doing exactly what she'd already taught us, 3 days before, without any of us knowing she was teaching it. One of the 11 was a kid named Okafor, who'd never been good in the dark, and he froze halfway up the slope with the water still climbing behind him, hands locked on a root, refusing to let go even when I told him the ground above us was dry and solid and going nowhere. I didn't know what to do with that, not really, except to do what I'd watched her do with my own name an hour earlier. Say his, plainly, twice, and tell him exactly what came next instead of how scared he should or shouldn't be. He let go. We made the points. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in 6 weeks I'd done anything in that platoon that looked like what she'd been teaching us instead of just surviving it. What she did in the wash after that, I only know in pieces. What I saw from the rim with a head count clutched in both fists. What Drum's recruits told me afterward. What came out at the formal inquiry weeks later. She'd anchored her static line to a juniper root before any of us even noticed she was gone, and she went down it hand over hand, into black water moving fast enough to take the legs out from under a grown man. 8 of Drum's recruits had bunched up against a culvert grate, tangled in their own gear, the current pinning them there the way it pins everything against a fixed point. She worked down the line of them in the dark, one at a time, by feel more than sight. 2 were tangled badly enough that she had to cut webbing free with a folding knife rather than untie it. 1 had climbed onto the grate itself and frozen there, too scared to jump for the line, until she said his name twice, flat and plain, the same voice she'd used on me, and told him exactly what came next, instead of how scared he should be, and he let go, and let the water carry him the 4 feet into her arms instead of past her. By the time she'd worked through all 8, the gravel shelf above the grate held 8 shivering recruits and nothing else, and she went back into the water a 9th time, for Drum. Drum had gone in after his own recruits without a line, the way panicked men do, and the current had taken him 40 meters downstream before a sandbar caught him face down and unconscious, his rifle still slung across his back, pulling him deeper with every wave that rolled over him. She found him by the sling. It took her, by Drum's own account later, since he wasn't conscious for most of it, 11 minutes from the first scream to the last recruit clear of the water. 9 people off that gravel bar who hadn't been standing on solid ground an hour before, counting herself last. She did rescue breaths on Drum at the edge of the wash, in the rain, until he coughed up half the desert and started swearing at her, which everybody who'd ever served under Drum said afterward was the most reassuring sound any of us had heard all night. By the time the company's quick reaction force finally got trucks down the access road, it was over. The rain had already started letting up, the way storms do once they've made their point. 26 recruits and 2 cadres stood soaked and shaking on the high ground at first light, and every single one of us was breathing. First Sergeant Corrigan arrived with muster sheets already printed out, ready to start filling in blanks. He didn't have to fill in a single one. I watched him read down the list twice, like the numbers might change if he checked them again, and then he looked over at Holloway, who was sitting on an upturned ammo can wringing water out of her boot like it was any other Tuesday morning at the depot. "How?" he said. Not even a full question. Just the one word, standing alone in the wet air. "Swiftwater Rescue Instructor course, 3 years ago," she said, not looking up from her boot. "Before that, 11 months attached to a long-range reconnaissance company that doesn't put its photo on the recruiting posters. You'd have known some of that, First Sergeant, if you'd read past the first page of my file before you handed me a roster. He had her file pulled that same afternoon. I never saw it myself. I heard from the company clerk that there was a bronze star folded into it, and a name, a call sign, whatever the recon company had called her back then, that the clerk wouldn't say out loud, because he said it still carried a classification flag on it, 11 years on. What I do know for certain is that Corrigan formed the whole company that evening, not just our platoon, all 400 of us standing in ranks under a sky still dripping off the eaves of every tent, and he read 2 sentences straight off the incident report, with none of the names blacked out. 9 recruits and cadre recovered from rising water, 0 fatalities. The entire recovery effort conducted solo, ahead of the Quick Reaction Force, by Staff Sergeant D. Holloway, call sign Iron Primer. Then he saluted her, in front of every recruit on that field who had spent 6 weeks calling her a babysitter behind her back, including me. She returned it like it cost her nothing at all, the same flat, unbothered way she'd folded that roster on the very first day, and then she told the company to get out of formation and dry their socks before evening chow, because somebody out there was about to earn a fungal infection standing around like this, and that, at least, was a training problem she could still solve in under 5 minutes. Drum walked with a limp for 2 weeks afterward, and never once let anyone forget whose sling had pulled him out of that water. He stopped eating with the cadre, who'd laughed along with him at that first chow hall comment, and started showing up early to whatever Holloway was teaching, standing at the back, taking notes like a recruit himself. Padilla found her 2 days later behind the arms room and asked, straight out, why she'd never just told him to shut up that first week instead of letting him make a fool of himself with the stopwatch. She told him some lessons only take the first time you teach them. He didn't have a comeback for that one either. I finished that training cycle with the rest of Echo Recycle, all 26 of us, every single one, which Corrigan told me himself, weeks later, had never happened with that platoon before. Not once. Not in 3 cycles of recycles and quiet discharges before ours. I still check the water level of a wash before I bed down anywhere near one. Every field problem since, whether anyone tells me to or not. I don't do it because I'm careful by nature. I do it because somewhere out in the dark that night, I heard a woman say my name instead of my number, calm as any other Tuesday, and I understood, finally, that being underestimated and being unprepared are 2 entirely different conditions, and only one of them is ever forgivable.